Oh yeah, it's double organic.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in for another dose of vitamin D with me, Double Organic. I want to talk about sitting and the science against sitting or sedentary activity and how unhealthy it is for us. And you might know from my other videos that I stand against sitting quite frequently, every day. I hardly sit at all. I try very hard to alter my life to almost eliminate entirely sedentary activity, whether it's using a standing desk or trying to break up any sedentary time that I may have with some active movement. And so I'm going to go through the science, a bunch of different studies. I think it's quite interesting, the information I'm going to present to you. So sit back. No, don't sit back. Stand up and relax. And of course, enjoy the show. So before we get into the studies, I just want to define what a MET is. M-E-T. It's a metabolic equivalent. And I'll somewhere put the definition and the mathematical formula for what it is. It's a very sciencey unit of measure, which basically is used to measure exertion, and anything below 1.5 METs is considered sedentary activity. And that's what we're talking about with these studies, is sedentary activity, whether it's sitting or any other form of being that is below 1.5 METs. This is unhealthy to do too much of. And I'll probably post a picture somewhere that shows a chart form, gives you some images or different activities that you can relate to different levels of exertion. Like I think 3.3 METs is vacuuming. Alright, so we want to be at that kind of level activity throughout the day. So, we've got to prove that sitting is unhealthy. It's been done, it's just that a lot of people maybe don't know the science, and that's why I'm making this video right here, right now. And hopefully this video will inspire you to be less sedentary. And we're going to discuss why that is important. On a side note, what we really need to do is create legislature to allow people in the workplace to have sit-stand stations and make that mandatory, just like hard hats are mandatory on a construction site. It wasn't always the case until people kept having things fall on their head and kill them, until it became mandatory. And sitting down is killing you. And so it needs to become legislation and sort of mandatory for workplaces to allow that option and educate workers on that topic. Get rid of those politics. The earliest study on sitting is called the bus driver study, and it's quite famous. You maybe heard of it? Probably not. It was done by Morris et al. In 1953, and if I say et al., which I will be saying a lot, it just means and others, all the other authors of the study. So when I say Morris et al., it means Morris and all the other people who wrote that study. He was just the main author. So Morris et al. Looked at the health of bus drivers. Now this was in England, I believe, where they had the big double-decker buses. And they looked at the two different bus drivers. You had the bus driver who just sat there driving the bus all day, and you had the bus driver guy, wasn't so much a bus driver, but he was the ticket guy. And all day he went up and down the stairs, making sure everyone had their tickets and stuff like that. And so all day he's going up and down the flight of stairs, walking up and down the aisle of the bus, and the other guy's just sitting there doing nothing. These two individuals had very different levels of health. The bus driver, not so healthy. The ticket guy, much better off. There's so many risks associated with being sedentary. Decreased bone mineral density, increased risk of cancer, increased risk of obesity, decrease in vascular health. And you can't just be active, you need to reduce sedentary time. I want to make it very clear at the start of the video here that being active doesn't outweigh the being sedentary, right? You can't work out for an hour a day and then sit on your ass for 12 hours. They don't equal out. So Resende et al. 2014 reviewed 27 studies on sedentary behavior. They found that regardless of how active those people were, time spent sedentary is positively associated with all-cause mortality. Increased coronary heart disease, increased diabetes risk, increased obesity, all the bad stuff. Those risks go up. And Wilmot et al. 2012 had the same findings. They did a systematic review of nearly 800,000 people, regardless of time spent active. Those who sat the most had the greatest risk for diabetes, cancer, heart disease, all the bad stuff. Hamburg et al. 2007 found that after just 5 days of bed rest, metabolic health was decreased. That meant increased fasting insulin, increased insulin resistance, increased triglycerides. And so if you have high levels of insulin, that means that you have insulin resistance. Insulin's not doing its job, so you're gonna have more insulin going, getting pumped out. And insulin resistance is basically like, insulin's the key that unlocks the door to let sugar into the cell to get out of the blood to prevent high blood sugar. But the insulin key is not working, it's just not working. Saunders et al. 2012 found the same thing when they did a systematic review. It was done on the acute effects of sedentary behavior, and it was found that uninterrupted sedentary behavior, uninterrupted being the key word here, decreased insulin sensitivity, decreased glucose tolerance, and increased triglycerides. Jobrin et al. 2014 found that increased sitting equals decreased telomere length. What is the telomere? The telomere is the last bit on the DNA strand. It's the buffer, kind of like on the end of your shoelace. You got that little hard plastic. It's the buffer that sort of protects the important part of the DNA. And it's not important. So every time DNA is replicated, a tiny little bit of that telomere gets snipped off. And the longer your telomere, the more that DNA can be replicated, and longer telomere length is associated with living longer and being more youthful kind of thing. If you have short telomere lengths, you're gonna look like an old geezer. Another way to think of it is you have stuff written on a piece of paper, and at the top of the paper, nothing's written there, it's just blank. And you can cut that off, keep cutting it off, but you can still read what's on the paper. It's only when you start cutting the paper where there's things that are written that you start losing the message. Kind of important, telomere length. Don't sit down so much. And Kilpatrick et al. 2013 found that decreased sitting time led to increased mental health. All right, let's give you some stats. You like stats? I don't mean the course. That course sucked in university, man. It sucked. Give me some facts. Give me some facts. I'm Canadian. Canadians spend about 10 hours a day sedentary. That doesn't include sleep. That's why I moved to the States, because I thought people in the States be a bit more active. No, it's not so good here either. Not so good. There's no sedentary guidelines at all, so there's no guideline out there like there is with physical activity. People, government's saying, gotta exercise this much in a day. It doesn't exist. So people are free to sit as much as they want, and sit they do. They want to sit a lot. Interestingly enough, there's an increasing trend to know that exercise is good, yet there's an increasing trend with less and less people exercising. The more you know, the less you exercise. Apparently, only 15% of adults get the recommended amount of physical activity per week. So probably they're not having enough sex, 'cause that does count as physical activity. Only 38% of British would exercise if it meant saving their life. Holy fuck. The British, no fucks given. So as you can see, so few people give a shit about exercise that exercising more isn't the answer. What we need to do is be less sedentary, and it's not the same thing. They're two very different things. exercise is intense, you know, running and lifting weights and doing all that kind of stuff. Being less sedentary is going for walks and vacuuming and walking to the store and just being more active. Very different things, you know. Being in the garden is reducing your sedentary time. That's not exercise. And you'll love this. Exercising makes people sit even more. And I've already said in a couple of these studies that it doesn't matter how active the person is. Their sedentary time is linked to all these negative health consequences. So if you exercise for an hour, you might feel good about yourself sitting down for 4 hours watching TV afterwards. And that 4 hours of sitting down is detrimental to your health, no matter how good that 1 hour of exercise was. And I just said how few people exercise or are willing to exercise, even if their life freaking depended on it. And I told you, people know exercise is good, yet they don't exercise, right? An increasing trend of knowing exercise is good, less people exercising is the trend. So it's easier maybe to get people to be not more physically active with exercise, but to get people to be just a little bit less sedentary, right? Instead of sitting down watching TV, if you could just walk on a treadmill. You don't have to be, that's not exercising, that's like bare minimum human movement, what you should be able to do. Or jumping on a trampoline while you're watching TV. I remember doing that when I was a kid, or my dad would get up and be jumping on the trampoline, trying to watch this show, and it's like, bing, you get the spring, I can't make a spring noise, but you know, the stretching of the spring, the sound of the trampoline. My mom would do it, then she'd stop after 30 seconds because she had to pee. Anyways, you get the idea. So let's talk about some studies that mention replacing sedentary time with just a little bit of activity, specifically called non-exercise activity, because we really gotta separate the two. There's non-exercise activity, and then there's activity that's exercise, and it really has to do with what you're doing. Do we call riding our bike to work exercise? Not scientifically, in terms of categorizing it in we would call that commuting. Anyways, Levine et al. 2007 found that by replacing sedentary time with non-exercise activity, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis went up. Neat. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Isn't that neat? And so basically, by just being less sedentary, they started burning more fat. No shit, Sherlock. And those people, their total calories burned was higher than if they exercised at all. So turn sedentary time into non-exercise activity by adding some breaks. You know, if you're working at the computer, get up, do 10 push-ups, and then do a couple pull-ups, and get back to work. I know sometimes it can stop the flow of work, but we'll get to that at the end. Some studies at how people like it and how productive they can be. Healy et al. 2008 found that by breaking up sedentary time with little breaks, resulted in a lower or smaller waist circumference, lower systolic blood pressure, decrease insulin, decrease glucose, decrease triglycerides, and increase HDL cholesterol, the good stuff. And then in 2015, Healy et al. Still at it. Good job, Healy. Love your work. Healy et al. Looked at replacing sitting with standing or stepping. And the result is that BMI reduced by an average of 10%. Graves et al. 2015 looked at sit-stand station and looked at their effects and their feasibility. You know, what's their efficacy? 47 people were randomized into the sort of sit-stand station, or the control, the comparison, which is sitting, the normal. They did measurements at 4 and 8 weeks, and at 4 and 8 weeks, changes were seen. Like cholesterol was going down, and people liked it. People enjoyed the sit-stand station. That's important. This is no chore. It's enjoyable. People like it. So people like the sit-stand stations, but what about productivity? Because at the end of the day, in the workplace, productivity is the most important thing, not the health of the worker. Who gives care about that? Not the employers. They want the bottom line. Is it, effective, or is it going to impede their productivity? Well, Commissaris 2012 looked at this and found that there's no negative impact. There's no negative impact on performance, no negative impact on cognitive function. Why they have the phrase, that's called thinking on your feet, or something like that. I don't know. Karakolis 2014 looked at sit-stand station, productivity and comfort. There was no decrease in comfort. In fact, people enjoyed it more. They found it more comfortable. And there was no decrease in productivity. So, I know this video is probably really long. I went over a lot of different stuff, but I hope you found it interesting and useful and informative, that you can now make an informed decision on your life to somehow make a change to reduce the sedentary time. Right? We've gone over the health effects, we've gone over the productivity. So hopefully you can somehow in your life decrease the sedentary time. I'm not going to take up any more time in this video. You're welcome to ask me if for any ideas. Like me, I use a standing desk. I'll show you my setup right here. Got my gym right there with my bike out of the way so I can film. And here's my setup. I got my laptop for doing work. I got all my school notes, paperwork. So it's doable, right? You just gotta make it happen. My first standing desk was like a box on a table. Now I have a desk that I built myself. I take breaks from that. Got a pull-up bar right there. Anyways. Thanks for watching. I know it's been long enough. I hope you found it interesting. Comment below if you have any more questions and all that kind of jazz. Remember, get the 6 aspects of health every single day. Earth, air, fire, water, work, rest, but not too much rest, because that's what we just talked about, how too much rest, not so good. But of course, there's different types of rest, which you can read about on doubleorganic.com. Anyways, be well, subscribe, and let's walk the path of health together. Peace. Whoa, look at all those recipes. Those look tasty. Give me some of that.